Thank you very much. As Alison said, it's a pleasure talking to non-architects, so I hope I don't bore you. Let me press this. Oh, sorry, I've gone the wrong way. There we go. So this is my rather long-winded title. I think maybe what I really meant, and in the context of Andy and Carl's talks there, I think may be quite relevant to what you're about to hear. So I've been involved in many significant projects around the world in my career. I've been very lucky to get involved in a very broad range of things. But there's one that goes pretty much unsung, but which I've always said within the practice is really one of the most significant of them all. And it involves helping effect really a small but important change in what's a huge market, the market of house building. And here you go. So, would you ever buy you'd never buy a car, would you, if it had been built in a field? So why do we accept and indeed expect our homes to be built in such a way? You know, we've got a pretty unpredictable climate, and we'll all hear stories of inconsistent construction quality. And to me, the only visible response to our climate challenge seems to be that windows get smaller and smaller and smaller, and that houses get darker and darker. So really, there's no place for design innovation. So this project then is really about something consistently better made, better performing, sturdier, and certainly less wasteful. And hopefully, a project that allows larger windows, let the light back in. It is, of course, and one of the behind the question at the beginning, it's a disruptive alternative, but it does make sense for a truly sustainable and comfortable homes for our future. So hopefully you can see these images. We like to show images, architects, and when we walked in the room and showed these, we could hardly see them from the back. But anyway, I'll try my best. You know, when I started, like Alison, about 40 years ago, I cut my teeth on the latter stages of the Lloyd's building. That's the building sort of centre left there, which I'm sure you've all, even non-architects, will know about. It was a pretty memorable introduction to life in the profession, being part of a small team, really creating something pretty otherworldly and future-facing. Of course, despite its outward appearance of modular fabrication and plug and play, throughout its construction, it was shrouded in scaffold, as I hope you can see there on the left. So it was built really, in the most part, just like any other building, whether it's domestic, commercial, or cultural. It was in the main really put together by specialists and artisans. It's a testament to their craft and skill for sure, but accidental damage was unavoidable, and our defects lists were very, very long. A building made in a field like this, even Lloyd's of London, can feel pretty second-hand by the time it's complete. So rolling forward about 20 years, my practice commenced the design of a building across the street from Lloyd's. It's now popularly known as the cheese grater, so that's the one on the far right there. And that building really exemplified the dramatic changes that had been gaining momentum through those intervening years in the commercial sector, where modern methods of construction, that's MMC, so Alison's talked about DFMA, but these are all really about different ways of making it rather than brick on brick, have become really increasingly part of a safer approach to construction. And the new processes brought with them a step change in quality and performance. Over 80% of the cheese grater, also actually made by Laing O'Rourke, was made off-site, and above ground, on-site, virtually all activity comprised dry trades, even making the floor slabs. And as you can see, sort of centre right, the outcome was a building built without scaffold and with very, very short snagging lists. And today, really, across our so-called developed world, to various degrees, the construction of all commercial buildings is carried out this way. It does require a different mindset, as Alison described, to the traditional approach. It requires a sophisticated and logistics-based approach to construction, and of course the designs that are fit for construction in that manner. So about 20 years ago, we also participated in the government's drive to bring MMC to the house building sector through a series of demonstration projects. The underlying logic wasn't dissimilar. It was about building safer with higher quality and better performance. In 2006, the government had introduced the Code for Sustainable Homes, and in 2010 committed to all new homes meeting code level 6, this meant 0 carbon, from 2016. This performance actually extremely difficult now and impossible to achieve through a traditional approach, but very attainable, I think, through the precision afforded by MMC. And in 2006, our first project, that's the one on the top left there, easily achieved code level 3. That was a 25% improvement over the building regulations at that time in CO2. And our experience working directly with a house builder was pretty enlightening, and despite them having little experience of an architect's input, it was rewarding for us both. The neighbourhood that was created on the top left there, as I say, also highlighted the challenges to be faced by nascent MMC contractors and commissioning bodies. From a design point of view, being future-facing, unlike cars, restricted sales to a keen but pretty limited audience. And concern from our the house builder was expressed when the obligation to meet that we had to meet improved space standards that applied to affordable and social housing had to be equally applied to the market housing. And this of course, as a consequence of streamlining construction, the streamlined construction approach. And here's the rub, it costs more to cut a sheet of material and to install it than to install it uncut. Consequently, it costs less and creates less waste to build a slightly larger room. This is just one of the disruptive effects of MMC, where the traditional relationship between cost and floor area is not so linear. However, whilst the contractor could plan the delivery of affordable and social housing, the practice of controlling the delivery of market sales played havoc with the smooth pipeline that was needed to maintain a momentum. The site management team, however, delighted with the new approach, no longer having, and this is amazing, to skip a building's volume of waste for every 3 constructed. This first project adopted what is now termed as Category 2 MMC, and that is panelised system. That's similar to the one Alison showed. So it still meant that houses were being built in a field, in all weathers. And in hindsight, the approach was certainly too disruptive to build momentum at that point in time. As the zero carbon deadline loomed, new government scrapped the target and the zero carbon hub disbanded. That ended significant institutional support for bridging government policy and industry practice in achieving these low carbon outputs. And recent years have seen renewed commitments, and the effectiveness and I guess the implementation of the policies are still subject to ongoing political will. Meanwhile, moving forward, our preference moved to Category 1 MMC, and that's modular. That's where you make it in volumes. And 10 years ago, we completed our first modest project for the YMCA for move-on accommodation. The project helped establish that modular construction could be competitive in an open book environment where construction speed made the difference. Our client, a charity of course, demonstrated that it worked financially for them in a way that conventional construction could not. The project garnered positive interest from journalists, politicians and neighbours, aside from being, of course, a game changer for residents. And we like to think that it helped galvanise the government to reaffirm their support for MMC, and in particular for modular construction. Further work for the YMCA and for Lewisham Council, shown here, demonstrated its versatility, but for it to become more mainstream, we really had to design it to look less experimental and more crowd-pleasing. So, this is where we are today. Our client is Cardiff Council, working with an established house builder who's their framework delivery partner. And this is a 9-home social housing scheme conceived about 6 years ago, and it's proof of concept that successfully pioneered an original approach in the city, now leading to further commissions. The design might be restrained, but the house's performance is certainly not. It's got big windows and big performance. It's a win-win. The design is neighbourly, and of course the construction was neighbourly too. Quietly assembled in 1 week, zipped up and connected over 2. And this is where you probably won't be able to read any of this, but I'll highlight it. But the facts behind this modular fabric-first approach really speak for themselves and demonstrate what's achievable today anywhere in the UK. Zero waste, designed to minimise waste and thus building more for less. Any waste generated is recycled by suppliers at source. High performance in all aspects, well above regulation, thermally, acoustically, and in their air tightness. And the post-occupation data suggests they're outperforming passive house standards. Now, passive houses has always been the one that one needed to achieve. It's the highest of high. These properties really are fighting fuel poverty. These are social housing. Most impressive of all, from a design point of view, is the consistency and quality controlled off-site. After 40 years practice, finally, a project with no defects list. So, if this makes so much sense, and this one, you won't be able to read that graph at all, so all I'll say, why aren't we all doing it? Why are we seeing so many modular companies in crisis while we continue to have an acute housing shortage? So the graph on the right is from the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, and it basically shows you that houses built by the private house builders has been consistent for the last 50 years, the number. The operational model they've developed has a very low base overhead with the ebb and flow of supply and demand that I mentioned earlier. That's all absorbed by subcontractors, so they take on essentially no risk. Many modular manufacturers enter this sphere with a grand vision to fix the problem, requiring a high level of outside investment. And they're consequently reliant on a significant pipeline and a relatively rigid set of processes, inconsistent with the ebb and flow and the vagaries of the planning system. When the pipeline falters, I doubt that the repayments do. The planning system is not the automotive industry, where in the UK, 65% of new cars sold comprise only 3 colours. Modular manufacturers can be resistant to architectural input, worried perhaps about messing with their product, but placemaking and contextual design are key to planning decisions, without which we've got nothing. Architects, of course, at the same time, must understand the constraints of modular and be creative and within them. And if we accept that the private sector alone will never meet the demand, the onus must sit with other housing providers to make the difference. Local authorities lost their skill set 40 years ago and now rely on the house builders' assistance and their established approach to deliver. The influence is so embedded, it takes an enlightened local authority with an enlightened house builder, as we've seen in Cardiff, to consider another way. So, government then really, I think, should support enlightened local authorities to incentivise the best in modular contractors. The pie charts on the left, which again you probably can't see, but the key is the blue and the red. The blue is the material in construction as a proportion of the total, and the red is the labour put that material together to actually make the building. The rest is essentially overhead. Figures are absolute, but basically it says a modular house costs the same, and it does. It costs the same as a conventionally built house, but the money is spent in a different way. Less on what's called site preliminaries, that's overheads, and more on construction. The manner in which the construction takes place through pre-assembly and off-site assembly reduces labour hours, so more money is spent on material, less time and more stuff. So this should be a movie. Okay, so we've been working now with the same modular manufacturer for the last 20 years. Throughout that time, they've evolved a fleet-of-foot approach, allowing them to match or beat traditional construction on price, whilst delivering at faster pace and with a significantly higher performance. The manufacturer is entirely self-funded, and like the traditional model, relies on a tight team of real people assembling the building's envelope using pre-cut material and ready-made components from a trusted supply chain. A supply chain of qualified subcontractors then finishes the building, carrying out the installation of ready-to-install products and pre-assembled components. As the traditional model, these subcontractors absorb that ebb and flow of demand, and everyone works inside. From the outset of any project, we've developed a shorthand working closely and very quickly together. The architectural, and concurring with Alison here, the architectural and fabrication design runs in parallel on the same platform to ensure that there are no gaps and that when planning permission is granted, they're ready to go. The approach matches the flexibility of people with the power of technology to be adaptable, quick, and accurate. The complex logistics that are so important in the construction of state-of-the-art commercial buildings on site is expanded to cover all processes, but undercover before site, leaving the street to quietly welcome new neighbours. Thank you.